Hello, everyone. Welcome to our AIIC event, Spotlight on Interpreting Research. You've seen the detailed program as you've waited for the event to begin. I'm Linda Ballantyne, a conference interpreter based in Montreal. I'm also an AIIC Advisory Board member representing the Canada region. We're very pleased to have 850 or registered or more than 850 for this webinar. Thank you so much for joining us from all around the world. For quite a few of you, it's the middle of the night. That's true dedication and a show of genuine interest in the topics we're about to address. This is an AIIC event. It's a public event open to AIIC members and non-members. We have in attendance not only interpreters, we have with us audiologists, academic researchers, health and safety officers, decision-making makers, audiovisual and simultaneous interpretation technicians, and others. AIIC is governed by Europe's GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, and I therefore want to inform you that this webinar is being recorded and the recording will be posted on the AIIC website and the AIIC YouTube channel. Any attendee who participates in this virtual event via the Zoom Q&A function is expressly giving AIIC the authorization to record what you write. If you do not want your name to identify your written questions or comments, please be sure to participate anonymously. It's possible to do so on Zoom Q&A. Thanks. As you know, there are several hundred of you attending the webinar, so clearly we'll not be able to answer all your questions, but we certainly will do our best to address the main issues you raise. Questions will be archived and we'll do our best to find a way to answer these, possibly through a frequently asked questions forum on our AIIC website, or maybe even a future event. Now, let me introduce you to our panel members, starting with our AIIC members, who are all conference interpreters in addition to their work as researchers. Marc Orlando, AIIC Research Committee Coordinator, is Director of the Translation and Interpreting Program in the Department of Linguistics, Macquarie University, Sydney, Australia. Elisabet Tiselius is an Associate Professor at the Institute for Interpreting and Translation Studies, Stockholm University. Alicja Okoniewska is a conference interpreter, interpreter trainer, and researcher, and Christopher Stone, sign language interpreter and currently reader at Wolverhampton University's Department of Interpreting and Deaf Studies. In addition, Christopher is president of WASLI, the World Association of Sign Language Interpreters. And you can imagine how busy Christopher has been this past week. Christopher, thanks so much for being with us today. And Klaus Ziegler, coordinator of AIIC's Technical and Health Committee. Gabriella Verdi, a member of the same committee with a special interest in auditory health. Lara Duarte is vice president of AIIC. And Lara, we're very happy to have you with us, representing AIIC's executive committee. And now for our very special guests and partners in research, Matthew Ball, former conference interpreter, now director of interpretation and chief interpreter at the Translation Bureau of Canada. Dijana Lazar, senior interpreter, Translation Bureau of Canada. Dijana is currently working on many Translation Bureau special projects, including the Hearing Protection Program for interpreters. And last but certainly not least, Arnaud, Noreña, and Phillipe Fournier from the Laboratoire des Neurosciences, Sensorielles et Cognitives at Université d'Aix-Marseille. Arnaud is team leader at the lab and Phillipe is a postdoc fellow. Both are researchers in auditory neuroscience, and we thank them very much for being here with us today. And thanks to all the members of the panel for being here. Without further ado, let me give the floor to Marc Orlando.
Well, Linda, thank you very much for the introduction and welcome everyone. 850 people from all around the world. So good morning, good evening, hello, and welcome. So as the coordinator of the research committee, I would like to say a few words at the start about the RC, as we call it, the Research Committee of AIIC. Yes, there is one. It's been actually in existence for many years. It was created in the mid-1980s, and many renowned academics were part of its members, and I will just name a few, but you know, from Jennifer McIntosh at the beginning, Daniel Gilles, Barbara Moser-Mercer, Minhua Liu, Ingrid Kurz, Claudia Monacelli, Kilian Sieber until recently, and the 6 members that we are now, myself as the coordinator, and 2 other male members and 3 female members. So today you will hear from Alicia, Elisabet, and Christopher. Unfortunately, Barbara Arendt, who's full professor at the University of Applied Sciences in Cologne, couldn't be with us tonight, but she definitely you know, is with us somehow. And Andrew Chung, who's from Hong Kong Polytechnic University. So 6 of us doing what? Actually, we are, as you know, affiliated with our universities. We are researchers, but we all are conference interpreters as well. We are part of this group, trying to you know, be the interface that the RC is supposed to be between interpreting studies and AIIC membership. We try as well to be the gatekeeper for any research endeavor within the association, whether it is internal endeavor within different committees, or whether it is with the external endeavors that we have, sometimes simply monitoring studies. The study you will hear about tonight is one example amongst others. So what's going to happen in this very first part is that you will hear from Alicia, Christopher, and Elisabet in that order. Each of them will tell you about what they think at the moment, or about one topic at the moment that they think is an interesting and topical topic in conference interpreting research, and we hope that will be of interest to you. There won't be any question and answer for this session, but definitely in the rest of the evening, we will certainly have the opportunity to get back to you. The committee, as I said before, has been in existence for a long time, like many other committees. And I just wanted to take 2 seconds to show you this book. Those of you who are interested in the history of AIIC and its different committees, try to get your hands on that one. You will learn a lot about what AIIC is and the different committees here. It's quite thick, as you can see. So without further ado, I will give the floor to Alicia. I will get back to you at the end to introduce our new initiative, which is about promoting research in conference interpreting for AIIC, and which will be the launch of our research grant. But I'll get back to you after the presentations of our 3 RC members. So Alicia, over to you.
Hello, good afternoon or good morning. This is a codex of Tlaxcala. I hope you can see it a little bit. I will explain. Here you can see Hernán Cortés with his interpreter Malinche meeting with Moctezuma. And we can say that this is an interpreted mediated communication between important leaders. So what we can see here, we can see that Malinche, she is copying the gesture, the pointing gesture of Hernán Cortés. That means that she is interpreting. And actually here we can see many different dimensions of power relations that are communicated through discourse. So to unveil these pre-existing network of power relations, as it is called by, among others, Ian Mason, we can ask following questions. We can wonder to what extent, for example, Malinche here, she represents the institutional interest of the Kingdom of Spain, of Hernán Cortés, or Kingdom of Castilla at that moment. We can also ask a question about which language in this multilingual encounter is of greater power or greater prestige. And also, finally, we can ask, what's Malinche's agency? That means, how does she want to seek the improvement or enhancement of this communication? So these are the 3 dimensions of power relations that can be searched or can be studied through discourse. These 3 dimensions were called by Mason as institutional power, interlingual power and interactual power. And I'm interested in the last one. I'm interested mostly in the power that power representation that can be studied through discourse. And we can say that what I'm interested in is how power relations that are accessible through discourse are reproduced in our interpreting. So we can take a look at that problem from different angles. For example, from systemic functional linguistic point of view, we can talk about what Monday called ideational meaning. So that is how the text that represents the experience does it through discourse, and how is it then encoded in the target production of interpreters. Also, from if we frame that from socio-cognitive point of view, we can talk of what Van Dijk called categories of ideological discourse. So we can analyze discourse to unveil these categories. And now I would like to show you just a mini example of such power relations that can be unveiled through discourse analysis, through contextual analysis, and even through ethnographic research. I would like to show you I'll give you a short example, because usually such research is done on bigger corpuses. So let's come back now to modern times and maybe look at less salient example compared to the situation with Malinche, where clearly we had these powerful leaders negotiating. So let's take a look at, or let's imagine that we listen to or interpreting the gender pay gap debate that took place some years ago at the European Parliament. At one point, and this is not the most famous statement that was done during that debate, as some of you might remember, at one point an MEP said, if reducing a gender pay gap continues at current pace, only our granddaughters will reach equality. What do we have here? We can, the speaker refers to the family. We all have emotional links with our family. And also she makes it inclusive because she says our granddaughters, our family. In Van Dijk words, we could state that here the speaker uses a discursive strategy of emotionality. Also, the speaker points at, uses certain victimization, which is another category of discursive power negotiation. She is pointing that there is one dominant or another dominant social group that is in a better situation than the female group who she implies earns less. So here we can also dwell on the agency of the speaker and other categories. But after that short reflection, we can already see two different categories. And what is interesting or important is how the interpreters tackle with these strategic categories or the discourse strategies, how what interpreting strategies we use, interpreting into our language, and if these strategies that we use are the same throughout different languages. Also, what non-linguistic strategies like a tone of voice do we use? Is, for example, exaggerating through a tone of voice adequate in the same way in different languages? And since I have to wrap up now, I would like to just briefly mention why are we reflecting at about power relations in discourse at all. I think that if we know how to tackle with different discourse strategies while we interpret, we can do it more consciously. and more consciously tackle with power relations that should be conveyed in the output discourse. And if we are conscious, we can teach students, we can train young interpreters. Also, finally, we can assess more consciously to what extent machine interpreting can deal with conveying power relations or not. And that's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia, and thank you very much for being exactly on time. So that was great, and I think it will be not only for future interpreters, but also for seasoned interpreters. There's food for thought here. They may never have thought about that, even if they did that intuitively. Maybe they never maybe reflected on that. So thank you for that aspect as well of your research and your interest. Christopher, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Hopefully I'm sharing my screen. You'll let me know if that's not the case, I presume. So I'm just going to give a short whistle-stop tour about research that we've seen in sign language interpreting, conference interpreting. It's probably worth saying that until quite recently, although conference interpreting formed part of the work that sign language interpreters did, much of the work that sign language interpreters do across the globe is within community settings. But if we look at some of the research quite early on, we see similar parallels in sign language interpreting, conference interpreting research, as we do with our spoken language colleagues. People were interested in register. Mostly, they were interested in how people represented in spoken language, what they were seeing in sign languages, and the kinds of decisions that interpreters made to represent discourses. And we've had some good discussions about discourse already. We then see, one of our megastars in the research world of sign language interpreting, Jemina Napier, started really looking at omissions, working from spoken languages into sign languages and the types of decisions that interpreters make, actually in a positive way. What we do as interpreters to process meaning and how we make specific decisions to omit things so that we can do our job better. It's an active process which works well for us. More recently, we've started to see work on teaming within conference settings. So people are interested in how do we work as teams. Typically, sign language interpreters will work in teams of 2 or 3, and we will actively support each other to ensure that we're able to provide optimum interpreting services. And I know that also happens in the booth. I mean, for us, we have to be a little bit more careful because most of the time we're on show. So we need to support each other in ways which are useful to us, but not necessarily distracting for audiences. And I suppose one of the larger domains of what we would probably consider conference interpreting in sign language interpreting is looking at interpreting on television. More and more now, we have live broadcasts providing access to sign language using peoples across the globe. And we're often in a studio, often in a separate studio where we're superimposed onto a screen. So the studio functions for us as a booth. No sound comes out of that booth for us. We just hear things via speakers, and then we have to interpret continuously in a single direction without interrupting the speaker because they're being broadcast somewhere else. So the magic of television. And we've seen some interesting research in China by a colleague, Zhao, who looks at user perspectives, how effective is interpreting in those domains, and then multimodality, which I'm just going to touch on a little bit because it's one of the areas that I like talking about. We know that in language, we often just talk, we just tell people stuff. But often when we're thinking about face-to-face communication, we have pointing and gesturing in a variety of different ways. And sign languages very specifically use depicting strategies. Depicting strategies are used in quite a lot of languages in the world, especially if they have mimetic languages. We know many Southeast Asian languages, Japanese, Korean, there's lots of mimetic language use. And so this isn't something which is unique to sign languages at all. But it does mean that when we're interpreting, we need to refer to resources. So here's a colleague of mine interpreting the news. And so here we see often what will happen with sign language interpreting. We watch stuff. We direct an audience's gaze to what's happening on the screen. If we're in a conference setting and we're standing on a stage, this is also a strategy that we use in situ. And so that's where we're probably slightly different from our colleagues who are in a booth. We also point. And again, this is something we might do if we were in situ. And we see this is a very common strategy for sign language using peoples across the globe. you could argue they're very much gesture-rich cultures. But one of the things we also like to do is we like to show depictions. So these are often two different types of depictions. One where it's as if you're in the scene itself, which we call an internal viewpoint, and one where you're looking down on a scene, an external viewpoint. And so they're very appropriate strategies to pragmatically enrich the source language when you're working into sign languages. So just to give you an example of that, again, my colleague, we see that she's watching something happening. And if you'll see in this picture, this is actually a still from a video from the broadcast, the placard is almost in the eye of the person who's standing by giving a narrative of this demonstration that's happening in London, central London in Trafalgar Square. So we see some kind of watching, and then we see some kind of mimetic language use. This is an example of the handshake that's used to demonstrate that the placard was almost in the person's eye. So that's very typical of what we do as sign language interpreters. And you also see this kind of thing where you actually see two groups of people all coming together. So this kind of conversion. So again, mimetic language use, which is all very kind of useful. So, I mean, for us, I suppose at the moment is television's a very controlled environment. So what about online? That's one of the areas where people are slightly more worried now. What do we do when we can't refer to the resources that people are talking to when that's a natural strategy for us to do? So, how is our work changing in these COVID times? And that's me done, I think. I will stop sharing.
Thank you, Christopher. And again, I just would like to repeat to everyone that we won't have the opportunity to answer any of your questions about research and about what you're going to hear tonight about these presentations. But again, you can reach out to the RC via the address that we have on the AIIC website, and we will be very happy to answer any of those questions. It is very interesting to see that more and more sign language interpreters are now able to join AIIC. You mentioned Jemina Napier, that I know as well quite well because she was the director of the program. I'm the director of now at Macquarie University, and I'm glad she just joined AIIC recently. But there are a few more joining from all over the world, and I think it's a great move for the profession and for what we're doing here. Thank you very much, Christopher. Elisabet, over to you. I think Christopher just ended up on RSI and new modalities, and I know you are going to talk about these things as well. So over to you. You're muted, Elisabet, sorry.
Better now. I hope you see my screen now. This is really speed presentations in different areas. My area is cognitive research and cognitive research in conference interpreting today. And I'd like to first say a word or two about what cognition actually is, because I think that we talk a lot about cognition, but we don't necessarily ground it in what it is. And Merriam-Webster says that it's a conscious intellectual activity, such as thinking, reasoning, or remembering. And I think this is interesting for interpreters because we tend to think that a lot of things that we do are not conscious, that we do it automatically. But cognition is something about conscience. It's also a mental action or process of acquiring knowledge and understanding thought, through thought and experience and the senses. And this is really, I think, what we do when we are producing interpreting, because we couldn't produce the interpreting without understanding it. And we use existing knowledge to generate new knowledge as part of our cognitive processes. And I think you would agree with me that the 4 absolute basic cognitive processes in interpreting is the fact of perceiving, understanding, transferring, and producing. And some of these areas might be easier to think about and understand and research, such as perceiving, understanding, and producing. But how do we actually do that transfer? And since we still cannot look into our brains, we don't really know, although we are figuring out more and more about that transfer. In cognitive interpreting research, I'd like to, if you want to know more about who said what, Minhwa Liu, who used to be a member of the research committee, wrote a great article about what was known at least until 2009. It's now over 10 years ago, but I think it's a very good overview about what we know of cognition in interpreting. The article is called "How Do Experts Interpret?" I can recommend that for knowing more about what we know. Research into cognitive interpreting, I mean, research in interpreting was on conference interpreting to start with, and a lot of the research in interpreting has been done on conference interpreting and for conference interpreting. And sometimes it's sad that we don't really reach out to the conference interpreters with the results, because it could so much improve both working conditions and teaching and other areas in conference interpreting. So therefore, it's obviously exciting that we have this event today, and also that we are going to listen to actual results from our community. But anyway, research on cognitive processes in conference interpreting have been looking at working memory, where we know that interpreters and experienced interpreters have a bigger working memory than any man on the street, interpreters as a group, that is. So even if you feel that you can't remember anything, we do have a larger working memory, which is good because it means that if we didn't have that, we could not do the interpreting task. Interpreting relies on us being able to store enough memory before we produce it. We also know quite a lot about the ear-voice span, or what we usually call lag. We know that the lag gets longer when the cognitive load increases. And the cognitive load, it can obviously be if we don't hear well enough, so a lot of acoustic reasons, but also if we don't understand, or if the language is very difficult, or if the speaker is very fast. We also know that there is a certain ear-voice span always, because we do need to process what we hear, of course. We are not machines. Expertise is very interesting and a big area of research in interpreting, and you may have heard me talk before about expertise because that is my pet area. We know that experienced interpreters as a group reaches higher levels of expertise. But we also know that this is not a straightforward line, and that there are many things required to reach that expertise. We love to look at cognitive load because the cognitive load is so obvious in interpreting. So how does the cognitive load affect different areas, like our production or our understanding or our hearing? If we increase the cognitive load of the interpreter, what does it make of the interpreting product? And just 2 words about the latest research, which it has been around for quite a while. It started in Italy in the 90s, but so much more are coming out now on neurocognition, which is exciting. And we know, for instance, now that interpreters lose gray matter more slowly than others. So gray matter is something all of us lose it in our brains because that's part of aging. So after 25, basically, we're done. But interpreters lose that gray matter more slowly, which I think is promising for us as thinking beings. And that gets me to the end of my list, but I'd be happy to discuss more about acoustic aspects of the cognitive processes of interpreting later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elisabet. And I think we will definitely have that opportunity during the evening. Just a reminder for our listeners and participants, the Slido channel has been closed for the event. If you want to ask questions, you can use the Q&A feature function on the Zoom on the Zoom platform here. And throughout the evening, we are going to filter and group some of your questions and make sure that we answer most of them, if not all of them. Again, so that's great. Thank you very much, Alicia, Christopher, and Elisabet. I think it was a great insight on what the RC does, but not necessarily as a committee, because as a committee, when we meet, we discuss many other things. And I realized that we've never discussed research actually together, except in conferences, but not really during our meetings. So that's actually great to have this meeting now. So again, I've seen a few questions in the Q&A chat box on research. Unfortunately, there's no Q&A right now. But what I would like to say is that it is interesting to see that there's so much interest now in research and how research can help, of course, practice and training. This is one of the areas that I'm interested in, what's called, practice-based research, when you look at the Interpreting Act as the object of research and how you can try to dwell on or make hypotheses on certain things and test them in training, and maybe through research then train the future interpreters to that. And in that respect, I think it was very interesting to work on the project you are going to hear about in a minute, which was the acoustic shock project, which came from a practical practitioner's issue and ended up being a research project, which hopefully will lead to some more training and will improve the work of interpreters. But before we go there, I just would like to finish this very first part here by telling you that we are launching this very interesting initiative in AIIC today, which is the AIIC Research Grant. A grant will be offered every year up to 10,000 Swiss francs for the selected project to support research in conference interpreting. As members of AIIC, we cannot conduct research for AIIC, so that's why it's interesting for us to go outside and try on very specific topics to try to get some researchers working with us and for them, but also for the association. So this is my pleasure to really launch this new initiative. We have some funding secured for the coming year, so I really hope we will have a few applications. Everything about this you will find on our RC landing page on the new AIIC website. So this is my transition to the next part will be that research will help us, as I said before, to improve the working conditions of interpreters and of users as well of interpreting services. And the project Phillipe Fournier will talk about now in terms of the study that was led and the findings that we got from this stemmed from an incident or some incidents that happened in Canada a few months ago, nearly a year ago, that were reported in the press. And Phillipe Fournier reached out to Linda Ballantyne, who introduced the event tonight, and asked if he could work with interpreters because he would be very interesting to do that. So Phillipe is an acoustic shock specialist, and we've worked, so some of us for the last year on this project. So I will stop here. I'll give the floor to Phillipe so that he takes us throughout the study, the findings, and then I'll just get back with you at the end to look at the recommendations that this study is bringing in the picture now. So Phillipe, if you're ready, over to you.
So hi everyone. I don't think I can share my screen though. Oh yeah, now I can. That's great. So first I want to thank Marc, and I want to thank Linda, Klaus, and everyone who made that event possible. And I'm really glad to talk today about acoustic shocks. I'll try to make my presentation over here. Everybody can see it? It's good? Great. So my name is Phillipe Fournier. I'm a Canadian audiologist. I'm also a postdoctoral fellow researcher at the University of Aix-Marseille in Arnaud Noreña's lab. And we're really interested in auditory pathologies such as tinnitus, so people hearing ringing in their ears all the time, and other pathologies such as hyperacusis, so people that report that loud sounds become unbearable. And we got interested in acoustic shock, and that's where the project comes from. First, I want to thank the team. Like Marc said, I reached out to them after seeing a CBC news report on a case of acoustic shock, and they were, grateful. They were really great in collaboration. They were open to the collaboration. So I really want to thank every one of them: Linda, Marc, Gabriella, and Klaus. Without them, the report wouldn't have been possible. So I just want to give a feedback of what we're doing in the lab. So we're interested in, like I said, tinnitus, hyperacusis, ear fullness, pain in the ears, all of those different symptoms. And we're interested in the heterogeneity of those different symptoms. So it's represented here with marbles of different colors, but it's just to show you that two individuals don't have the same symptoms. So for example, if you take one, someone can have tinnitus that is reactive to noise, have pain in the ear, pain in the neck, and another individual can have loud sounds, reduced tolerance, migraine, sensation of floating eardrum. So even though, you know, when you go see an ENT specialist, you say, oh, you have tinnitus, it's all the same, tinnitus is all the same. We don't believe it is true. We think that there's possibly different subtypes. And maybe one way to do that is by asking more about the different symptoms that people are experiencing. So we launched a study 2 years ago. It was an online questionnaire on the different symptoms. And we tackled people who have high level of hyperacusis, tinnitus, and other symptoms. And just to give you an idea of what we're trying to do is if different symptoms, for example, ear pain and ear fullness, are really correlated, so they are triggered by the same event. For example, loud sounds always trigger ear pain and ear fullness. Maybe it's the same structure that is responsible for that perception. So maybe it's something in the middle ear, the eardrum or the muscle in the middle ear. And maybe if you always have tinnitus and sound distortion, then maybe it's more related to the inner ear, because those symptoms are not correlated with the other ones. So that's what we're trying to do with the online questionnaire. And I saw on the news, because I'm even though I'm in France, I'm still trying to connect with Canada. So I saw on the CBC News that some interpreter suffered from acoustic shock and had a lot of range of symptoms. And sometimes they are quite severe. The case that was presented at the CBC News was quite severe. Someone was reporting that after an acoustic shock, he had nausea, tinnitus, dizziness, headache, clogged ears, sound hypersensitivity. And this is basically the symptoms we're interested in. So I contacted Linda Ballantyne in Canada, who put me in contact with people of AIIC, and that's where we decided to collaborate. Everybody knows interpreter, you're all interpreters. I was not really knowledgeable on what you were doing, and I learned a lot about that your experience, what you're doing really at work. But you know, you're speaking, you're in a booth, and a lot can happen. And I was shocked by what kind of incident can happen. Somebody can yell on the microphone, somebody can drop the microphone. There's a lot of different events that can cause acoustic, loud, brief sounds that can trigger symptoms. And I really learned a lot, but it seems like interpreters, anecdotal reports had a lot of those events, were exposed to a lot of those events. So we decided first with the group, with the project team, to get a better idea of what was the prevalence of acoustic shock. So we decided to ask AIIC members if they had experienced acoustic shocks. And we were really large in the definition. It was any acoustic incident, so loud, brief incident that caused one or more symptoms. It could be temporary. It didn't have to be severe. It didn't have to impact quality of life. It just needed to be an acoustic incident with the symptoms that will appear. Regardless, it is permanent, temporary, or else. And we got more than 1,000 respondents. We also asked if they had more than one acoustic shock, if they reported it officially, did they tell their employer, and if they were wearing a headset, was it correlated with the headset? We also asked questions about the demographic, what kind of symptoms they've experienced since they started working as interpreter, age, sex, and other demographic data. At the first question, the most, the one that kind of shocked me was 50% of interpreters, almost 50%, so 47.1, but almost one interpreter out of two reported experiencing acoustic shock. 32% said no, and 21% said, I'm not sure. And most of the people that said, I'm not sure, said, I've experienced acoustic incident. I had symptoms, but it didn't last, so I'm not really sure if we can consider this as an acoustic shock or not. Or I've been exposed to a lot of sound, but I'm not sure I had symptoms. So we believe that there's probably more than 1 out of 2 interpreters, that people that said, I don't know, are probably people who got acoustic shock as well. Then we asked people who reported, said, yes, I had an acoustic shock. How many acoustic shock they've experienced since they started working as an interpreter? And vast majority, 90% of them said it was more than 1. And 25% said it's more than 10. And a lot of people said to us that it was complicated to state a number because it's retrospective. I have to look in my memory. I'm not really sure. And some of them also said, I don't I don't get exposed to a lot of acoustic shock, maybe once a year. And similar individuals said, I'm exposed to a lot of acoustic shock at least one a year. So for the exact same number, some people think it's a lot and some people think it's not a lot. So that was interesting as well. And we asked them from the list of symptoms below, so all the different hearing symptomatology we're interested in, check all the symptoms that you have experienced since started working as an interpreter. So you can see there's tinnitus, feeling of fullness, clogged ear, sensation of floating eardrum, hearing impairment, static time pain in the ear. So we asked them, okay. And we compared the group who said, yes, I've been exposed to an acoustic shock compared to people who said, no, I've never been exposed to an acoustic shock and never experienced one. And here's the list of the symptoms. So you can see that, for example, for tinnitus, more than 50% of people who have experienced an acoustic shock reported having experienced tinnitus, compared to 20% for people who never experienced acoustic shock. Same thing with feeling of clogged ear, so earfulness, hypersensitivity to sound. Again, it's higher for people who reported acoustic shock. We have the same thing with stabbing type pain in the ear and sensation of floating eardrum, hearing impairment. So some symptoms are more experienced in people who have acoustic shock, have experienced acoustic shock compared to people who never experienced acoustic shock. So the first phase, we were able to see that acoustic shock is quite prevalent amongst interpreter, that most interpreter experience more than one acoustic shock. Most of them will experience more than one. And interpreter who report acoustic shock are more inclined to report or experience ear-related symptoms such as tinnitus, clogged ear, hypersensitivity to sound, stabbing type pain in the ear, and hearing impairment. It doesn't mean that those symptoms are experienced permanently or that they are severe. It just means that they have more chance of experience those symptoms. They could be temporarily. We cannot say that. Phase two, we asked people who said, yes, I've experienced acoustic shock and I want to participate in a more in-depth questionnaire, which was the questionnaire that we've developed at the lab. And different questions were asked in that questionnaire. It was quite long, it's 25 minutes to fill the questionnaire. I'm gonna give you some of the questions. So one of the questions was from the list of symptoms below. It's exactly the same symptom as previously. Which one have you experienced following an acoustic incident? So a brief, loud noise while working as an interpreter. And again, the same kind of symptoms were pointed out. A lot of people said tinnitus, clogged ear, hypersensitivity, headache, hearing impairment, stabbing type pain in the ear. So a lot of people do have acoustic shock and experience those symptoms afterward. Then another thing that we did in the questionnaire is ask for each of the symptoms that they have now, please state the current intensity of those symptoms. So what is the usual intensity of the sensation of fluctuating hearing loss, of sound distortion, of hypersensitivity, so sensation that noise are louder. So to quote on a VAS scale from 0 to maximal intensity, what are the usual intensity of each of those symptoms? And then we did an analysis to try to correlate the symptoms that had similar intensity. And that's what we have here. So basically, what you see here is the different, every arrow is a symptom. And the closest the arrow are together, it means that they are really well correlated. So for example, tinnitus, sound distortion, and fluctuating hearing loss are really well correlated. So we believe that it might indicate that maybe the inner ear is implicated in those symptoms. Clogged ear, tension, pressure, tingling are really well correlated. So that's probably more the middle ear, and other sensation like neck tension, jaw pain, temple pain are really well correlated. So that's more head and neck symptoms. So we're trying to define which symptoms, where does originate each of those symptoms and the group of symptoms that are well correlated. That's why I put here over here. And then we compared, and that's part of the report, we compared the 104 interpreter to a bigger population that we gather on the online questionnaire, people with severe hyperacusis tinnitus and so a patient database. And what we found, so the graph over here, the first dimension over here is severity. So If you go to 0 over here, you have really less severe symptoms or almost no symptoms. And over here, the severity is higher. And here it's the location. So if you go down over here, it's more of the head and neck. And if you go higher, it's more of the ear only symptoms. And what you can see is the left compared to the right side means that the people in the right side have more severe symptoms and usually more pain symptoms. And on the left, they have less severe symptoms. So what we can say is the majority of people who had acoustic shock have less severe symptoms when we compare it to a population of really high symptomatology, hyperacusis and tinnitus patient database. But still, we have a few people in black, interpreter, that do have severe symptoms. So the vast majority of people that had acoustic shock don't have severe symptoms in terms of intensity. Doesn't mean that you can have a low intensity symptom and still have an impact on your quality of life. But the intensity of the symptom, the more severe, most of the interpreter have less severe symptoms, but still a few interpreter have severe symptoms following the acoustic shock. So we have ongoing research. We're investigating, again, the hyperacusis related symptoms. We're developing diagnostic measure of tinnitus, of hyperacusis, and we're also trying to see which part, the eardrum, the middle ear muscle may be implicated in some of the symptoms like ear fullness and pain. So thank you all for your attention. I hope this was clear. And I'm going to pass the mic to Marc and Arnaud then.
Thank you, Phillipe. Thank you very much for going through this. I would just like to say one or two things for those really interested in the report. It's available online on the AIIC website. You will find it. It's a 35-page report where you can find, in more details what Phillipe covered tonight. I just wanted to ask a question to Arnaud, actually, who is here as your boss, Phillipe, if I may. And you all work normally on acoustic shocks with a different type of population. So Arnaud, when Phillipe told you about that study, what do you think? What do you think of this? What do you think of the results? And what's your view on this?
It's okay. Can you hear me? It's okay.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, go. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, no, it was a fantastic opportunity. Really to investigate the impact of acoustic shocks on very homogeneous, relatively homogeneous population. So we started that work using actually a general practitioner who reported so these symptoms after an acoustic shock. It was only one patient. So Phillipe actually, started the work on so patients so with all these symptoms of hyperacusis, pain, and so on. But it's what is important to report. It's relatively unknown, this condition. And suddenly, so we have that population with a relatively homogeneous job and a relatively also homogeneous impact. So yeah, so it was very interesting.
What is also not always very well understood is how to define acoustic shocks. Actually, we talk about acoustic incidents, acoustic shocks.
Absolutely,
does any of you have more information on that for our members here?
Well, so Phillipe, I don't know if you want to answer on. I can say a few words. Yeah, it's true that acoustic shock it's a loose term. Acoustic trauma. So an acoustic trauma, it's acoustic. It's a loud acoustic incident. So it's an acoustic incident that can produce a cochlear hearing loss. And what is not an acoustic trauma can be an acoustic shock. So an acoustic shock, it's an acoustic incident that can have an impact on the auditory system. And then we can enter a bit in the speculation on our work. An acoustic shock may have an impact on the middle ear. And potentially also on the psychology, can be traumatizing also for the system and so on.
I can add that basically acoustic shock, the way I see it is it's usually defined by not only the sound but also the symptoms that comes afterward. And right now it's not so clear what kind of sound is it really different from a sound that can produce acoustic trauma or not? What is the level? Is there really a difference in level between acoustic trauma, acoustic shock? And so it's not so clear. It's really defined by the symptoms right now, which is not convenient. But
no, it's a very good point actually. It's defined a posteriori actually. So yeah, I mean, it complements what I said. It's so the acoustic trauma. It's there is a mechanic impact on the system. Okay, like a hammer on a table. Okay, so there is a mechanic impact. So on the cochlea, there is a mechanic impact on the cochlea, and for the acoustic shock, so there is acoustic shock. A posteriori, we realize it was an acoustic shock a posteriori when we have an impact, but the impact is not necessarily a mechanic impact on the cochlea.
Okay. Thanks. I will just simply go through the different recommendations that are at the end of the report, and recommendations that are to be discussed, that are to be hopefully implemented in the profession. But there are one or two where, before we move on to the Q&A, that you could probably give us your view on. But just simply for the different people who are listening to us and haven't read the report, I'll just go through the list of the 10 recommendations that we made after the analysis of the data that we had. So the first 7 recommendations are related to training, prevention, and medical monitoring. So we definitely recommend from this report to provide training for clients, technicians, interpreters on how to handle audio equipment correctly during conferences to avoid these incidents. The second one is to provide information at every conference on how to use microphones and headsets safely. Third one is to investigate maybe or flag the benefits and limitations of some technological devices, such as headsets with sound limiters, add-in limiters or adapters, and we recommend that it is assessed quite thoroughly. Raising awareness about acoustic incidents is another thing, to try to reach out to professional associations and employers who should provide interpreters with information about potential risks with acoustic shocks and consequences, and about noise regulations in their countries, because there are different noise regulations in different countries. And I think it's probably in the hands of employers and professional associations to try to bring that up in their own region. Professional associations, employers, and work health agencies should try to develop procedures to facilitate the reporting, because one of the big things in the report, as you said, Phillipe, is that interpreters do not report acoustic shocks, and we should try to find a way to make that change so that there is a record somewhere of this. And then we recommend as well that as part of an ongoing medical monitoring, interpreters should be urged and encouraged to perform an annual audiological evaluation, including a hearing test. The seventh one is that conference interpreters who experience severe symptoms definitely try to consult a hearing specialist and get to the end of that. Finally, the 3 last recommendations are about research. More research on interpreters' hearing health will be encouraged. And again, in relation to the research grant that we launched just before, it is an interesting recommendation. Recommending as well specific research on the level of noise interpreters are exposed to in conference interpreting, on-site or online. One very interesting one that comes often and specifically has come, really very often in the last few months since we've moved to remote simultaneous interpreting, is the fatiguing effects of effortful listening because of poor sound quality. Then the research is recommended on the increased vulnerability of symptoms and frequent pain symptoms of some interpreters, but also on these individuals who are, as Phillipe described, more prone to severe symptoms more than others. So I will maybe just I have just simply listed them, but one that interests me is I would like to have your views before we go to the Q&A for the next 10 minutes. Just in a few minutes from both of you, what do you think of this specific research that we want to see happening about the fatiguing effects of what is called effortful listening because of poor sound or noise pollution or whatever we call it when we work online. Phillipe, maybe Arnaud?
Yeah, I can start. I think it's really interesting, and it's kind of intriguing why some interpreters report some of the symptoms that has been associated with acoustic shock without any acoustic event. And yes, definitely there should be more research on that because there's an increase in the report of symptoms. Although we're not sure there's really an increase in the acoustic shock. So it doesn't seem to fit. So why interpreters report more symptoms now with the pandemic, and now that they're doing remote simultaneous interpreting is really interesting. And what is going on in the ear is another aspect that is definitely interesting, and that we would be interested in pursuing. And maybe Arnaud can complement what I'm saying, but.
No, it's so we touched something that is very interesting, and it's a kind of collaboration. So this relationship we have now with the interpreters. So the scientists, so we entered the field through the acoustic shock. Actually, it was the relevant question. So you asked, Marc. Yeah. So indeed, so the acoustic shock exists. So we have to define it, but we tried to do it just before. But there is also that promising hypothesis option with the auditory fatigue, actually, and it's completely new, I think, for the field, for us. And yeah, so and it connects actually to the tensor tympani, to the middle here. So it's the our pet topic for research right now, or one of it. And indeed, so when the tensor tympani contracts, there is actually a reduction of the auditory thresholds in the low frequencies. So reduction of auditory threshold, and limited to the low frequency. So potentially the tensor tympani, when it contracts, it has a protective effect, protective function, and potentially also it could improve hearing, filtering out some undesirable information in low frequencies, for instance. And that then starts to be interesting in the context of auditory fatigue. So you interpreters, you work with your ears and your brain and your working memory. And if actually, so you work with a signal quality that is not good in a noisy context and so on. So maybe, so of course the brain will work a lot on the signal, but I mean, the brain cannot do miracle with a degraded signal. And at the entrance, at the door of the system, there is the middle here, and maybe the tensor tympani contracting can remove some information. So for hours, so I don't know exactly the duration.
I was about to tell you. I think the good thing in the report and this recommendation is that needs to be definitely researched and evidenced.
Absolutely.
From my very personal point of view, I've read quite a lot in the last few months about RSI and effortful listening and the fatigue, and everyone is talking about this as a very hot topic. And of course, because it is very important for all of us to protect our ears and be aware of our hearing health. At the same time, we haven't seen anything really substantial and evidence in terms of research. So we really need to have something substantiated by the work that you guys do, and that we will
absolutely. So but then it's so there is this hypothesis now. And then,
so it's to be investigated.
Yeah.
I would like to just simply, sorry to interrupt like this, but I would like to switch to the questions that have been asked. There are quite a few. Some questions have been voted more than others, so I will definitely take them in that order. Those that have received the most votes on that. So one is, the very first is inquiry about state-of-the-art devices, plugins to alleviate ear damaging frequencies in a home booth setting when an interpreting hub is an option. That might be covered probably in the second part as well, but do you have any views here, Phillipe, for example, on this?
I don't. Maybe
Okay.
Arnaud has, but I don't.
Look, I think it's going to be covered because our colleagues from the THC have a lot to say about this. So those who definitely put that question and voted for that, don't worry, we'll cover it in a minute. One other is about, so again, about devices like preserve ear or limit ear, which I believe, or we believe, have been tested by AIIC. So again, I think it's going to be covered, if I may, in that second part of the event tonight. There's a question about, we understand that in RSI, we never get the full frequency range. If yes, can the loss of phonetic subtleties be one of the cause of additional cognitive load? Do you have any idea on the relation between this and the cognitive load for interpreters?
In the same vein, from what I just said, so if you degrade the signal, then it will increase the cognitive load. And then, so you will use all the system, is offering to you to improve the signal and noise ratio and so on. And then you may use your tensor tympani potentially and so on. So I mean, this is of course speculative, but anything that can degrade the signal, will increase the cognitive load.
Okay.
And the risk to get the symptoms.
And there is definitely a need to assess the signal that comes out after a remote interpreting session using Zoom, Skype, when you're doing it directly at your work and comparing the different signals. I haven't read any study on that, so there's a definite need to know exactly what is going on.
And it's exactly actually, a direction of research that would be interesting. So okay, as long as there is a cognitive load increasing, then the system is trying to compensate. And then by trying to compensate, then it fatigues the system. And then at some point, because there is some of fragility and so on, so at some point the system is collapsing and then triggers symptoms.
And for interpreters, it's on top of everything else that is quite difficult as well when we work remotely, not in the best conditions. There is something that is said, that is asked about, have we taken concrete steps to reach out to and raise awareness with health professionals? I assume that's going to be part of follow-up work from the association, but also from associations in general. I think now that there is this focus on audiology for interpreters, hopefully professional associations will certainly try to reach out to health professionals.
I'm going to say, Marc, maybe I can add, a lot of work out agencies were not aware of the problem. So that's where reporting the incidents becomes important. Is there a lot of people working in work health agencies that I've talked about weren't aware of the problem, and by seeing the report, they were amazed of the symptoms that interpreters are experiencing. So I think that in that sense, bringing awareness, you can use a report to actually bring awareness, and that's why reporting is important. Even though you might feel that you're not going to be taken seriously, as long as there's a trace, at some point, work health agencies won't have a choice to take you seriously. So.
One that's definitely for both of you. Can acoustic shock also include damage to hearing as a result of repeated long-term exposure to poor sound? So we're back to what we had before, with poor sound quality with higher volume, even without sudden surges in decibels. So even if there's not a peak or a surge in decibels, can we still suffer from acoustic shock, or can it be considered as acoustic shock? And cause damage.
So you say when the sound is very loud.
Long-term exposure to poor sound. That's the question here.
Long-term exposure to
poor sound, where interpreters compensate for poor sound quality.
Poor sound. Sorry. So if you listen, relatively loud sound above 90 dB SPL, 90 dB, relatively loud for hours. So then you increase the risk to impact your cochlea. So then it's not an acoustic shock anymore. So it depends on the symptoms you have, but then the acoustic event is an acoustic trauma in a sense that the acoustic event can impact your cochlea, that producing a hearing loss. Because I don't know if we mention it, but what is important, it's with an acoustic shock. Yeah, you don't necessarily produce an impact on the cochlea, so you don't necessarily produce a hearing loss. Okay, so it's different. But of course, with a loud sound, you can produce hearing loss.
Yes, and I think that was mentioned in the report, but we don't know to what level interpreters are exposed to. So, you know, if you're doing an interpretation session above 90 dB for 4 hours, then yes, you might have hearing loss if you're doing it all the time. So there is, you know, norms, European norms, North American norms on what is the level and the duration that you shouldn't surpass. So that's another research question, and maybe the Bureau of Translation of Canada will talk about that. But definitely, you can have hearing loss, whatever, if the quality of the sound is good or bad. If the sound is too loud for too long, then definitely you can have hearing loss.
I will. I'm sorry to interrupt here, but again, you will be both parts of the second part of the event, so there will be probably other ways of coming back to this. But I just would like to wrap up on one very specific thing here, which is the fact that many questions relate to what's going to happen next. So I won't necessarily, you know, tell anyone what's going to happen next, because I can't really read a crystal ball right now. But the idea is that we've definitely established these contacts with you. I know that there are other audiologists now that some work has been done that are also interested either to work on the same premises and maybe go in the same directions as you or not. And that's going to be what is interesting as well, as always in research. So I really hope that at one hand, the grants that we have now and the relations that we have established with that community as well will be helpful for further work and of course, for us to know more about specifically what happens with interpreters and the type of equipment and environment we work in. Thank you very much, both of you, for this very specific part of the event. Phillipe, once again, at a personal level, thank you very much for all the work during the study, because it was an interesting, very interesting experience for all of us, Linda, myself, Klaus, and Gabriella, who worked with you. So thanks a lot.
Thanks to you all, and thanks to you for leading it. It was
no
great
worries at all. So I think it's exactly on time, you know, 09 when we're supposed to move on at 10. Linda, over to you.
Yeah, congratulations, Marc. You really stuck to our schedule. And thank you all those of you involved in the research in this first part of our program. Now we're moving on to Klaus, who is our coordinator in AIIC of our health and technical issues. So Klaus, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much, Linda. Hello to everyone, also from my side. I have the great pleasure to guide us through the second part of the program today. Now, after having heard about some very interesting research projects and different approaches, but also about the, well, I would say quite alarming results of the study conducted by Phillipe and Arnaud and their team, let's move over to a very, let's say, pragmatic and practical activity focusing on health and safety for interpreters. Actually, a topic that has always been important, no doubt, but maybe somehow neglected by the interpreter community, maybe also by the research community, and which is now being much more discussed due to the dramatic increase of delivery of interpreting services in remote modality. As a Technical and Health Committee, we had the privilege to collaborate with the Translation Bureau on several occasions and projects. So it is a great pleasure now to have Matthew and Dijana here with us today. And without further ado, over to you, Matthew and Dijana, and we are very much looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Klaus. First of all, I just wanted to thank AIIC for inviting the Translation Bureau today to this important event. We welcome the opportunity to share our experience and to learn from others around the world in the interpreting community. It's great to see so many interpreters together virtually in one place. And I'd also like to thank the non-interpreters who are among us today. who are working to support us, partners like Dr. Noreña and Dr. Fournier, those from our respective organizations. I know the Bureau management is online watching. We have people from our health and safety committees, and I've noticed and been told that there's AV suppliers who are joining us today. So thank you to all of you. At the risk of sounding cheesy, together we are better. Together we are stronger. So, and I don't want to take too much time, but we're here today to talk about 3 projects that are underway at the Translation Bureau that deal with technology, sound quality, and interpreters' auditory health. The main objective of these initiatives is to gather the facts on the current working environment for Translation Bureau interpreters, but obviously these lessons will apply to many other interpreters. And because we really want to make informed decisions and evidence-based decisions, and that's the purpose of our approach at the Translation Bureau. So the context slide shows, I don't know if you can see the slides, I can't follow, but anyways, the context slide shows, the next slide shows, you know, that even before the pandemic, the Translation Bureau was really grappling with remote interpretation challenges. COVID really has highlighted the challenges that we're facing. The Bureau was providing simultaneous interpreting over the telephone, unlike many organizations around the world. And we had anecdotal complaints and grievances, and frankly, formal grievances from our staff. So we realized that we needed empirical data to inform our decision making. Remote interpretation was already popular as more and more people worked from home. Canada is a very vast country, as you can imagine. So geographically, there were lots of reasons for our client requirements changing. And I would say remote became incrementally more and more popular. At first, you know, going back almost 10 years, there was the odd teleconference that we did. And gradually it became more and more popular. Clients saw the ease with which they could acquire interpreting services, you know, it was handy. They could work from their office or their home and not have to travel great distances. So the client requirements in Canada really strongly favored remote interpretation for all those reasons. And the one other thing I want to say, just because the context for the Translation Bureau is very different from other organizations, other interpreting organizations around the world, at the Translation Bureau, we do not control the working environment of interpreters. So the Bureau sends interpreters to the client organizations, be it the Parliament of Canada, the Government of Canada, or departments and agencies. So this really complicates the solution for us, and it's required that we are able to convince the clients of the need for changes based on facts. So we can move to the next slide. So the first of our projects is collaboration with the National Research Council of Canada. They have a team of scientists led by Dr. Ginet from, believe it or not, their aerospace engineering group. And they've helped us acquire empirical data on sound quality and sound pressure levels that interpreters are exposed to during the assignments. So Dr. Ginet, like I said, is a senior research officer on aeroacoustics and structural dynamics. And they've done extensive research in this field, particularly for the Department of National Defense in Canada, because they contributed to their development of a hearing protection program for helicopter pilots and air traffic controllers who, believe it or not, are exposed to far more dangerous acoustic environments than interpreters. So we gave them 2 mandates. The first was to analyze the sound quality and the sound pressure levels that interpreters are exposed to on Parliament Hill. And the second was to assess the performance of the portable hearing protection device that the Translation Bureau has mandated for use with our interpreters, and that's the Preserve Ear device. So I'm going to let Dijana take over and give you more details because she's far more versed than I in this.
Thank you, Matthew. It's good to be here with everyone and to see so many people join us virtually for this conference. It shows that it's an important topic. So I'm going to talk briefly about the different projects that we've been working on for the past few months, and then answer your questions if you need more specific information. So I think we can go to the next slide, please, Richard. Thank you. So for the purpose of our study, Dr. Guinet and his team developed a testing protocol with specialized equipment, as you can see on the slide, that allowed us to gather sound samples during live in situ interpreted assignments. And thanks to the mannequin that you can see on screen, we were able to record the exact same volume, the exact same sound, at the exact same volume the interpreter was listening to while interpreting. And we selected several different assignments on Parliament Hill in July for this test to account for a variety of factors. So we had virtual meetings where everyone was on Zoom and the interpreters were on site. And then we had hybrid meetings where some of the participants were on Zoom and others were in the room with the interpreters. We also recorded samples with different equipment. So we used the AIIC compliant consoles where the hearing protection is integrated inside the console, and some of the older models that we used with the Preserve Ear, which is our hearing protection device. So the samples are now at the stage of analysis. So they're being analyzed as we speak by Dr. Guinet and his team at their lab, and results should be coming soon, probably next month. We can go to the next slide. In addition to these tests, we also asked Dr. Guinet and his team to assess the performance of our hearing protection device, the Preserve Ear, because we have been hearing from interpreters that the Preserve Ear was not really giving them enough sound, enough volume for simultaneous interpretation, and especially in remote settings. So we asked Dr. Guinet to assess the Preserve Ear with the amplifier. So they selected 3 models of amplifiers and they constructed a chain, a sound chain, as you can see on the slide, with the mannequin at their lab to test the performance of the Preserve Ear. And what we've seen from the test is that even with the amplifiers, the Preserve Ear is not giving us the sufficient quality of sound that we're looking for and sufficient volume. So Dr. Guinet and his team, since they are researchers and academics, they were looking for solutions, and they found something that might replace the Preserve Ear for us, which is a digital audio interface that you will see on the next slide. If we just can move on, that's the Motu 8A. So it is a bit bigger than the Preserve Ear, but their suggestion is to modify this module to turn it into a portable hearing protection device, but it would be an active limiter compressor as opposed to the Preserve Ear, which is a passive limiter compressor. What it does is simply it brings all volume down. And as an active limiter, it would allow us to really suppress the peaks, but not the rest of the sound we're getting. And according to them, since it's a little mixing board, it would maybe even allow us to improve quality of sound somewhat. So we're now at the stage of testing it at their lab as well. And then the next stage would be to test it in situ with real interpreters on real assignments, remote or in person. But of course, as we progress and all of the consoles become AIIC compliant and have integrated hearing protection, we might not need a hearing protection device, but still, if this unit helps us to improve the quality, it might be interesting to explore further. So this is about our project with Dr. Guinet. Now I'm going to talk about our hearing protection program. So even before the pandemic, we started working on a hearing protection program because, as Matthew said, we had incidents of acoustic shock and people were being injured and more worried about their health, their auditory health. So what we did is we tasked our health and safety coordinator at the department to help us draft a hearing protection program for interpreters specifically that would clarify and define potential risks for interpreters' hearings, the employer's responsibilities to mitigate those risks, and offer an auditory healthcare plan, which would include hearing tests, hearing protection devices, training, and protocols in case of an acoustic incident. So if we go to the next slide. So in the context of this project, we approached Dr. Fournier and Dr. Noreña to help us put together a hearing test plan and a protocol in case of an acoustic incident that will allow interpreters to see an audiologist quickly after the incident, and also to inform them on how to deal with their symptoms, because it's really important to react quickly after an incident occurs. So right now we're exploring different options in terms of selecting the right partner for the implementation of this hearing healthcare plan. And we are working with our health and safety coordinator and consulting Health Canada, as well as some external healthcare providers. And in addition to this, we are also developing another research project with Dr. Fournier and Dr. Noreña, which would help us gather empirical data on the impact the digitally processed AV signals have on interpreters' hearing, like we just talked about. So the goal would be to perform a hearing test on interpreters who have experienced some of the AS symptoms that were mentioned earlier. And so to perform a hearing test immediately before they start interpreting a remote participant with a digitally processed signal, and then to perform another test right after they end interpreting, to see if their symptoms worsened, if new symptoms appeared, and really assess what was the impact of that signal. And we are now at the stage of surveying interpreters, our staff interpreters, on their symptoms, thanks to a questionnaire that was developed also by Dr. Fournier and Dr. Noreña. And once we have a better idea of the sample of interpreters who have symptoms and of the severity of their symptoms, we will, with Dr. Fournier and Dr. Noreña, hopefully we'll be able to create a protocol to perform these tests in situ, so during real life assignments, and we could also do another test where we would do the same thing but with participants in the room, so with direct sound coming from the room, which would allow us to see what is the difference, what's the difference in the impact. So that's the next project that we are working on. And then I think it's Matthew's turn again. He will talk about our project in Geneva.
So we've gone through two of the things we're working about with the National Research Council and with Drs. Noreña and Fournier. The one other project we're working on is, and it was discussed in the previous session, so I'm happy to be able to provide some information and background. We're working on research on fatigue and load in remote interpreting. So I met with, I was at the University of Geneva in the fall of 2018 and discussed the matters and the things we were hearing anecdotally from our interpreters with the University of Geneva. And at that time, we were still providing audio conferencing or teleconferencing, telephone interpreting. So the issue was that we had all of this anecdotal feedback from interpreters regarding the poor signal quality, the lack of the video, but there was really no empirical data to support interpreter claims, and we really wanted an evidence-based rationale for the decision whether or not we would continue to provide audio remote interpreting. So the University of Geneva designed a research study to assess the impact of signal quality, that is whether or not there's audio and video, and signal mode rather, audio and video, and signal quality, and that is the quality of the sound that we're all talking about today, on the interpreter performance, and also on fatigue, and also on cognitive load. So the study is within the laboratory subject experiment study. It is a cohort of professional conference interpreters being conducted and being recruited by the University of Geneva. And it will assess really the impacts of these variables, so signal quality, signal modality, and the task. The two tasks are interpreting and shadowing on the cognitive load, which will be measured through eye tracking and pupil dilations and blinks and filled pauses and all kinds of empirical quantitative measures. And as well as some qualitative. There will be assessments by interpreters as well, and on interpreter fatigue, which will be based on interpreters filling out a feedback questionnaire. So this for us is sort of interesting because it's something we don't have really hard data on, and it's something that I think is sorely lacking in the environment and for the profession and for people making decisions on it. So we had our launch kickoff meeting. The University of Geneva has been doing work on it already. Dijana and I had the kickoff meeting just yesterday with the University of Geneva, so their work is well underway, and we hope to have results within the year. Dijana, I think I'll let you continue.
Okay, thanks, Matthew. So we'll go to our last slide, which is on the platform testing. So we all know that our working conditions changed radically since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, but the platforms were gaining popularity even before the current situation. So for us, it changed our working conditions entirely. We went from working in committee rooms and conference rooms with our clients to working from studios and hubs and booths. But all of our clients were now remote on Zoom, Skype, WebEx. It was a big adjustment for everyone. What we did in terms of technical approach, we tried to educate our clients on the right equipment. So the ISO compliant headset, having a good computer, having a quiet room, having a cable internet, and so on. So we're really working on compliance now, which is not always easy, but we're slowly getting there. But at the same time, we were seeing that a lot of the international organizations were using different platforms, which were really designed for remote simultaneous interpretation, such as Interprefy, Kudo, and so on. So to have more evidence and data on these platforms, we created a pilot project at the Bureau to test a few of them. We had to equip the interpreters because our interpreters are not working from home. They're still working only from hubs. So we sent them ISO compliant headsets, additional screens, Ethernet cables, and so on. And then we designed a test for platforms really to assess them from the interpreter's point of view. So the questions we asked the interpreters when they tried two of these platforms, which are Kudo and Interprefy. Is the interface user-friendly? Is the hand over the mic feature easy to use? Does the chat function work properly? Is the interpreter able to communicate and hear their virtual booth mate? Is it easy to switch from the presentation view to the speaker view? How is the sound and the video quality? How is the tech support? All of these things that are crucial for interpreters when they work remotely. And the two tests we did so far were quite positive. I mean, we had positive results. Both platforms were deemed to be interpreter friendly. However, working from home presents a lot of challenges in terms of soundproof space, internet connection, direct tech support, being able to communicate with your booth mate. So that adds a lot of extra work for the interpreter, who is already dealing with a high mental load and sometimes poor sound. So the plan is to continue testing other platforms and also to do tests with these platforms, but from a studio and some of our clients, and to see how it translates into real life, and then eventually we will be able to have a better understanding of what's on the market and what's happening in the world of RSI platforms. So I think that's it for us. So if you have any questions, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Matthew and Dijana, for this very interesting presentation. I think we got a lot of information from your side, both from a practical and a very pragmatic point of view, but also with regard to the research project that you are conducting together with the University of Geneva. I think this is exactly the kind of example that we need and the kind of activity we need much more in the future, from my point of view. Just in order to be able to really have some evidence-based data when we talk about the issues that are raising nowadays. And there have been a lot of discussions in the past, and actually we see a lot of discussions happening on social media on the different topics related to remote modality, but we do actually lack of evidence-based data, and I really hope that these kind of projects can give us and deliver us exactly what we need. Now, there are a couple of questions on the Q&A that are related somehow to what you are or what you just explained to us. And maybe I can just pick up a couple of them. There are some questions about the preserve ear or the adapt ear or limit ear. You remember that when we conducted that project together with the THC and the colleagues of AIIC Canada, we had some difficulties in identifying exactly what those devices were doing or were not doing. Could you maybe give us some more background information on that, and maybe also explain a little bit how these devices actually work and where the pitfalls are, maybe also explaining a little bit on what calibration of this device together with the headset that people would be using, why this is important, for example.
So there's a lot of variables, and I have to say at the outset, the Bureau had tried a number of different devices. And with the cooperation of AIIC, we did testing. We sort of landed on the preserve ear device, and as Dijana referred briefly to the functioning of it, one of the limitations of the preserve ear device is that it's a passive limiter. It doesn't have its own power source, and so it draws on the power from the sound, and it needs to be calibrated also based on the headset you're wearing. So we have a small team of technicians at the Bureau who support us with that. So interpreters provide their preferred headset, and they calibrate it based on the specifics of the impedance of the headset. So it's been, we've been hearing varying sort of complaints about them, that it muffles the sound, that interpreters have said they can't really hear properly, work properly. Some of the interpreters even told us that they were not using it, to which from a management perspective, I said, well, I'm sorry, you need to use it even if you can't hear, and if you have to interrupt service, my prime concern, our prime responsibility is for your health and safety. And then after that, the quality of service to the clients, obviously. So it's been a bit of a challenge for us, which is why we wanted to do more tests and why we mandated the National Research Council to test it. They did preliminary tests, and they really wanted to test the device in situ. Which is why they came onto the facilities of the Parliament of Canada, and they conducted tests using the amplifiers on site, using the interpreters' headsets in the exact same conditions that interpreters are working in. And so we're awaiting those results. But I don't know, Dijana, do you have more detailed?
Well, what they told us when they evaluated the preserve ear is that actually the way we're using it, with the headset we're using it, it's not a good fit. So we're using very low impedance headsets like the COS or Sennheiser, which are very, very sensitive and need very, very little power to work. And the preserve ear is actually developed for a higher impedance headset, like the ones we used to use a long time ago. So there is a compatibility issue between the preserve ear and the headset, and the amplifiers we tried didn't really improve that fit. So what they suggested is to evaluate some alternative headsets that have a higher impedance. And also they said, well, the preservier is a passive, it's just a knob, it just turns everything down. So it does protect the interpreter, but the interpreter can't hear properly because you'd lose 40 decibels easily. So then what happens is the interpreter will take off their preservier because they want to be able to work, and especially now in remote settings where the sound is not as good. So that's why it's not ideal. It was really not designed for interpreters. So that's why they came up with the MOTU, which is a active limiter. So it will kind of cut off the high end decibels, but not lower the whole thing. So hopefully it will work. We'll see. We still have to test it. They're kind of creating this device for us in their labs, and it's their first time working with interpreters, so they're not used to our working environment, so they're kind of figuring it out with us. But we have a great working relationship, so hopefully we'll be able to test the MOTU soon.
I might just add one more thing, which is that the preservier is required when you're not using ISO compliant consoles, SI consoles, which is still the case in many of the facilities that our interpreters are sent in. However, the Bureau has also worked to upgrade with our we happen to be in the same federal department that is responsible for procurement across the government of Canada, everything from pens to fighter jets. And so luckily we have specialists we worked with to upgrade the supply arrangement or the standing offer on audiovisual services across the government of Canada. So we've actually upgraded, thanks to Diana's work, the technical requirements for these services to demand or require an ISO compliant console. We've given AV companies 1 year to comply. So, and that was starting back in April. So as of April this year, or rather next year, that we will only be working from ISO compliant consoles, in which case there's already a compressor and the preservier will become redundant. But right now there are still facilities that are using non-compliant. So that's another sort of information that needs to be taken into account.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it's very important to really mention the fact that it's not as simple as just taking one of those devices and everything is solved by that. We hear a lot of interpreters saying, "Oh, I'm very happy with this or that model." I think it's not that easy, and everyone should really be very aware of the fact that there might be some real limitations when using the wrong equipment and the wrong combination of equipment. This leads me to a second question that was formulated on the Q&A part of our session today, which has to do maybe with other types of solutions. I mean, in your case, interpreters are basically working from, let's say, fully serviced hubs with technicians being there on site and really being able to handle all the equipment appropriately. What would you say could you imagine that there would be also some other solutions available that could be effective and that let's say a non-tech savvy interpreter might be able to handle as well, maybe more on the software side? Did you have a look into these solutions as well?
Well, yes, actually, I'm not promoting anyone, but we've been working with Interprefy and Kudo and kind of trying to use their platforms and to see how it works. And Kudo recently actually developed like a little portable console that you can plug into your computer, and it's a mic with the with the knobs and everything. It really resembles the real console, and the idea is to help interpreters set up their home studios where they would have a space dedicated for that with a stable internet connection, a good computer, even a secondary internet connection in case the first one fails, and then could use eventually like this little portable console, and that would alleviate some of the mental load that they're having from using the mouse and looking for commands on their screen. So a lot of these platforms, I think, now will come with innovative solutions because it's just the way we work now, and it will probably stay and go on for a while. So I think that, yeah, there are definitely ways to set up a home studio and work with some of these platforms. And what's interesting is that a lot of the platforms also say, RSI platforms, that they're compatible with web conferencing platforms like Skype or MS Teams. So you could be using both. And I know some of the interpreters working on the private sector have like very innovative solutions into integrating these. So I definitely think there's options there as well.
Okay, thank you for this answer. Actually, I was going a little bit more deeper into the compressor limiter features.
Oh, okay.
And I think it's also important to say that these kind of consoles not necessarily include that feature, which basically is one of the most important ones when we talk about hearing protection, of course. This would be an additional feature that we would have to implement. And there are a couple of solutions out there on the market, software solutions, which you can run on your computer. But actually, you need to know what you're doing there, and you need to know very well what you're doing there. And that's why we do not recommend for every interpreter just to use it, because it's quite a challenge to find the right basic setting for this. And even then, you're not really sure if you're well protected, because we are not audio engineers, and we don't know how to handle actually this equipment if something goes wrong or whatever. Okay.
Yes.
So
true,
yeah. Thank you very much for this part, presentation and Q&A on this. I would now move over to the panel discussion. Panel discussion with some of the people that we already had on board during the first part of this event today. I think we heard already a lot of very interesting things on research, on a lot of different things. And I'm actually very glad to have such a high-level panel here with us today. I don't even want to imagine the exciting side talks we could have if we were meeting physically, but that we will have to leave for a follow-up event. And by the way, I promised myself this would be the only allusion to the pandemic while moderating the event today. I think we are all know what the situation is like, and I think it's not necessary to repeat all these things again and again. So I would like to start today's panel discussion with some questions maybe that first came into my mind while listening to all of you during the first part of the session, and then later on move over to the questions that were formulated on the Q&A. Marc already mentioned some of those, and I will try to pick them up again and direct them to one of you specifically. Without any special thinking, I would just start with one of you. Maybe Elisabet, as you explained some very important research, let's say, approaches in terms of cognitive load and cognitive effort. There was actually one question on the Q&A which also came into my mind, which is that if we work on remote, we know that there are some limitations in terms of audio quality, basically limitations in terms of frequency response, also frequencies coming into our ears. Could you say something about what these could have as an effect on the cognitive load? Is this an additional cognitive load that is being caused by these effects? And someone is asking about the loss of phonetic subtleties that are linked to these effects, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about this, and is there some research on this being done already, and can you tell us something about these effects?
I would love to say that apart from the research on that the Translation Bureau is now doing together with Geneva, there's a lot of research going on, but the sad truth is that there's not much on distance interpreting yet. I suspect that it will explode now because this is the reality we're all living in, and everybody is interested in looking into it much, much more. But we don't have that much done already. But obviously, what we know about cognitive load, because the things that we have been testing when we look at how interpreters react is, if we have the speaker speak faster, if we have the interpreter hear worse or less, how does that affect the output? And the effect on the output is because our cognitive load decreases and we have to concentrate more, or we didn't perceive what was said, or we don't have the time to cover everything that is being said. So therefore, clearly, there's a lot of loss in the interpreter's production when we have to increase the cognitive load. And it also increases our fatigue. And we know now from some research, which I unfortunately cannot cite because I can't remember the name of those researchers, but they looked at just at online meetings and the fatigue there, mainly due to the fact both sound, but also the fact that you cannot look into people's eyes. And although we don't necessarily look into people's eyes when we are on site as interpreters, we are still much more able to perceive also the visual information, which is very, very limited on a screen. So all this obviously contributes to the increased cognitive load and makes our effort greater and therefore our fatigue greater, and also our wear and tear in all our abilities greater. So yeah, but no set answers so far.
Okay, thank you very much. This, at the same time, is, let's say, kind of motivation for all of us, especially for the researchers in the field, to maybe do even more than we have been doing until now. And I think there is quite a lot to do, and this is something that we also want to, let's say, maybe pick up with the research grant and activities or initiatives alike in order to improve that situation. We also need to take into consideration, I think, and that's my personal opinion, my personal feeling, that there is not a lot of research being done, basically, let's say, not only on the acoustic side that we were talking about right now, but also on a lot of additional aspects that I think are important in this context now. And I just ask myself again and again, what can we do all together in order to improve the situation and not wait 5, 8, or 10 years, but really get some evidence-based data as soon as possible. Now, we all know that there are some limitations, and that scientific research, if it is being well done, takes its time, definitely. But I'm still trying to find out what we can do in order to improve the situation that we are facing right now. This brings me to a question that I would like to formulate to Alicja. Alicja, you being yourself an interpreter and an interpreter trainer as well, but also researcher in the field of interpreting, what do you think are the topics that would have to be addressed most urgently by researchers? And how can this best be done? I mean, we are having this event now on a worldwide scale, but of course, there are a lot of activities also on the European level. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about what you think can be done on that European level.
Thank you, Klaus, for your question. And actually, while listening to you, I thought that it would be very useful to talk about different factors, because we are now in the situation where we have problems with hearing speakers correctly, and we deal with research, with interpreter health, hearing health, which is extremely important. However, hopefully one day we'll come to the situation where we can remotely work in ideal conditions or almost ideal conditions. And I still think that in such situation, we should take care of additional factors. For example, I will go back to meaning negotiation. I would wonder if meaning negotiation is different for us interpreters while working in remote, because the we should also remember that not only we are in remote, very often the delegates are also in different contexts. They are at their homes. So we should actually also take under the consideration other factors that can, for example, disrupt our performance, because we see somebody in a completely different context, and we are taking all these elements under the consideration. And also, for example, if we just pick one element of an irony or humor, how that would be interpreted depending on a different contextual situation. And I think there is one important thing that was said before, and I think that Elisabet mentioned that we should talk about our research and results to interpreters, but I think we should also ask interpreters about their perception. So for me, a very important thing would be to study or to explore the perception that we interpreters have on this huge change that is now going on. It is also connected with the visibility of interpreters, how our role changes when our visibility changes, how are we motivated, or where do we find that motivation, and how are we going to teach students to be motivated with this different visibility, and if that influences also the communication. And yes, and finally, to solve the problem of how can we continue with the research, I would like to repeat and call to all the colleagues that I actually made some time ago, that I think it's extremely important that we take part in and not shy away from the studies or experiments when the scholars or researchers come to us and ask us to participate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alicia. And to complete the round from, let's say, from the more scientific point of view, I would like to ask or to come back to Marc as well. Marc, the research committee of AIIC understands itself as gatekeeper for quality research. You repeated that before when you introduced yourself or introduced the RC. Now, in order to really be able to play that role, you need to have people knocking on that door first. A part of the research grant, which I think we are all very excited about, what else can the research committee do or intends to do in order to have more quality research handled by and within AIIC, but also outside, of course? I'm asking this specifically because we do read a lot of articles being published on social media. There seem to be a lot of, let's say, private researchers and tech-savvy interpreters, all with their own opinion. But I think if we really want to get reliable data, we need something else, something more. So what would be your comments or your recommendations, your initiatives in that regard?
Thanks, Klaus. Well, it's a tricky one because I could go in many different directions. But yeah, first of all, let's come back to maybe AIIC and internally what can be done within AIIC. So the grant will hopefully, for the next 4 years, will bring us data and studies for at least 4 different projects, hopefully over the next 4 years, and that's already one thing. There are other things that are done internally and could be probably done better, and that we are working on this within the advisory board with the different committees as well. The committees are giving, we all volunteers, we're giving lots of our times. The RC is part of the TFDI, your group is part of the TFDI. We're all working with the training group as well. So I think there's a lot that can be done at that level already, and can probably be improved a little bit as well. Now, looking outward, I think there's definitely, so the grant will be an opportunity to hopefully get in touch with different communities. We know that this study with Phillipe, for example, will give us an opportunity to work with other audiologists or people interested in that. There could be other aspects in health that we could certainly explore. So I do think that the ball is in our camp in one sense, is that we could be much more interdisciplinary than we are now. I think there is another aspect as well, is that we've spent years on looking at the interpreter and the interpreters only. And I think it's bigger than that. I think we need to conduct research on other areas as well. In translation studies, for example, we've moved on the focusing only on the translator, but more the translator as an agent of the whole translational act. And I think it is more or less the same in interpreting. We should look at the interpreter as one of the elements of the equation and start looking elsewhere to do research and interdisciplinary research with colleagues, whether it is in community interpreting or in conference interpreting, in specific context or not, but not only about interpreters. I think it goes beyond that. So I would love to see more of this in the future. Look, I hope with all these different initiatives that the 6 of us in the RC plus all the people we work with within AIIC will help. We are also very well connected with groups like SUTI, like IATIS, and it's important to be in touch with these researchers as well. I was on the board of SUTI for a few years. And many of us are part of universities that are members of these things, and there are more and more connections and bridges that are built between these different environments. So I hope that everyone will be more interested in interdisciplinarity than it has been the case so far, and not necessarily focus only on the interpreter or the interpreters, but more the ecosystem, if you want, as very often people mention, the whole interaction equation or ecosystem we could research.
Yeah, thank you very much, Marc. I think interdisciplinarity is one of the key words. Definitely, that's how I also see this. And at the same time, this is one of the biggest challenges, of course, because you need to bring together the people that are relevant in this case. And of course, if we talk about, let's say, other disciplines outside the interpreting field, it gets much more difficult because you need to find people who are really willing to participate. It has to do a lot with funding. We can also come back to that afterwards. How can we get some funding for these kind of initiatives? Because these projects, of course, are nothing that you can just simply do with a few dollars. Definitely not. Now, as you mentioned already, and coming back to our 2 audiologists that we have on board today, I would like to ask Arnaud and Phillipe one question that came also through the Q&A, which is about bone conduction headphones, something that has been mentioned a couple of times in different articles. I think it's a very interesting technology. Could you give us some insights in what bone conduction headphones could be, or why they are different to the ones that we usually have on our ears? Is this a technology really for the future? Are there limitations? What would you say about this?
It's a really interesting question. We use bone conduction in audiology. So when we're doing an hearing test, we're going to compare the air threshold with the headphones compared to the bone threshold. So bone threshold is something that has been known in the field for a long time and have been used to diagnose hearing loss and usually conductive hearing loss. If you have a perforation in your eardrum, then your bone threshold will be different than your air threshold. But it is funny to see that there is more and more headsets using bone conduction. Is it, your question relates to, is it of a good quality for interpreters? That's the kind of question you're trying to ask?
If it could be a possible technology for interpreting, yes. Okay.
It's a tricky one. One thing that is of particularity to bone threshold is that the frequency range is different from air conduction. So that's actually one thing. If you're talking about sound quality and all the frequency component, then you have to know that bone conduction will not have the full range compared to air threshold, so to conventional headphones. So that's one thing. Is it something, I have no experience, I don't even have one. We've done some tests with bone conduction at the lab regarding ways to bypass the middle ear. And my own experience was that the sound wasn't that bad, but could it be used for interpreting? I don't know. I don't know, it's a good question. And does a lot of people use it for interpreting, use bone conduction? Oh.
We're actually planning on ordering a few headsets because I tried it, and actually I was pretty amazed with the sound quality, and some of our interpreters mentioned that they would like to try them, so it's something we want to order and try as well.
Well, the advantage is that you avoid the acoustic stimulation. It's only mechanical. So, for instance, so you don't disturb outside yourself. But yeah, as Phillipe said, so you can only use bone stimulation for low and mid frequencies. So, and I think it's so beyond 4 kilohertz. So there is no transmission of high frequencies. So it's use lots of information, and yeah, it has been developed especially for hearing aids actually, and to avoid larsen, for instance. And so for hearing impaired people, for some conditions, so it's very useful. It's working very well. But for interpreters, I would be skeptical.
That's really interesting to hear, because this technology actually was commended as being one of the future technologies possibly for interpreting. And what you just told us really, well, contradicts a little bit that very positive approach to this technology. But we would have to see, we would have to see some testing. And I'm very glad to hear that, for example, the Translation Bureau is looking into these kind of technologies as well. And that's exactly what we need. Because
but it's funny because you are kind of, two directions. So some people, they say, so you need to hear the 20 kilohertz. So you need to have really, the fancy earphones stimulating until very high frequencies, and for that direction in particular. So it's the other way around. But it's true that it's spectacular, and there are some advantages.
Yeah, and maybe if it's very speculative, but if you have middle ear muscle tension and you're not going through the middle ear because you're directly stimulating the inner ear, maybe you don't have symptoms afterwards because you're kind of relaxing. I don't know. It's really speculative, but
you bypass the middle here.
You bypass the middle ear.
So you bypass actually the first stage of protection. So
yeah, we should at least be very careful with it. That's definitely something that we can take away from this short discussion. I immediately have to make another question, which goes a little bit into that direction. It was not formulated today, but it came up in several discussions we had in the past, which is related to the fact that many interpreters usually, or very often, do not wear their headsets on both ears, but tend to take one of the headphones away and put it behind the ear, which at the same time would be a kind of a bone conduction then, to my understanding. What would you say, can this be dangerous also, because there could be a different kind of transmission of frequencies? Especially in the context of acoustic shocks, if something would happen there and you would get a very high impact, a very strong sound, powerful sound there, could this have some negative effects?
I would doubt it, because when you're doing bone conduction, you have a vibrator that is transmitting directly to your inner ear. When you're putting your headphones on your bone, there's a change of impedance. You're going from the air to the skull, so just that change of impedance reduces a lot the level of the sound that will be transmitted afterwards. So I would say I don't see why it would amplify the danger of acoustic shock, but
no, you don't. I mean, you don't really stimulate the cochlea, with a headphone. Just pull on the skull. So because the power is not enough.
Yep.
For this impedance, the mismatch. But so I would say no, you don't do anything. But what you do actually, it's you create an asymmetry, And then, so we come back to the cognitive load. Ecologically, so we use the 2 ears. And so with this actually a very intense cognitive load of interpreting, well, so you work with only 1 ear. So it's, I guess, it adds an additional difficulty. Yeah, and that is possible.
Okay, thank you very much. A very interesting discussion. We could do much more of that, but I think we should move on a little bit in our discussion today. I would like to welcome my colleague Gabriella Verdi. I hope she is with us now. I know she had an assignment this morning, so it was quite difficult for her to attend, but I think she is on the list now and she is there with us. And I would like to ask her one question that we received, which is related to raising awareness among health professionals, but also related to another question, which is raising awareness amongst speakers, participants at remote events in the first place. Gabriella, can you tell us a little bit? Are there any steps being taken, for example, by AIIC also, in order to raise awareness amongst health professionals in the first place? Because I know that this is one of your favorite fields.
Yes, thank you for the question. In fact, it's one of the areas of interest for me. In fact, when I joined THC, I did so because I observed that interpreters' health has been neglected from all viewpoints for too long. Nobody cared. And in fact, from our acoustic shock report, we could see that many colleagues that experienced an acoustic shock said they didn't know who to report to, and they were absolutely unaware of any way that they could proceed, even by attending an emergency service and having a clear prescription and a report of the acoustic shock. So I've always thought that, all of us are exposed to loud, brief and unexpected sounds throughout our professional careers. And we may not be aware of having experienced an acoustic shock because symptoms do not immediately develop. So what I mean is that symptoms may tend to build up with the passing of time after repeated exposures and lead to disabling effects in the long term. So my guess is that a large number of people would report suffering from tinnitus, ear fullness, dizziness, balance disorders, hypersensitivity without being able to report any clear and well-defined situation in time and space that caused an acoustic shock. So when we had the opportunity to cooperate on the acoustic shock report, I immediately thought that of course, that is an emergency situation, is a clear event. But in the long term, how many of us are really going to be protected from a general viewpoint and in health terms? Because another area that we should be focused on is interpreter health in general, how to protect it and how to have work-related injuries officially recognized by Social Security and private insurance company. Here we have a long way to go. In fact, the only data available on work-related hearing damage so far came from studies on call center operators. So there was nothing on interpreters. Our AIS report, our AIS prevalence study, has been the first such study on interpreters ever produced so far in the world. So we need more such official and scientifically proven and evidence-based studies if we really want to involve and be able to get the medical community on board and really get an insight into the possible consequence of our profession on our long-term health. I think AIIC and the Technical and Health Committee can do a lot in promoting interpreters awareness, employers awareness, technicians awareness. But in order to do so, we have to let people know what our problems are. When I got in touch with medical experts, audiologists and vestibologists, to try and involve them in this process, in this potential research project that we're planning for the future. Many of them didn't know at all what our requirements are, what our needs are, what our problems and issues are. So, and probably many interpreters are not aware of the risks that they're exposed to during their professional careers. AIIC has done a lot in this direction, especially from a technical viewpoint, by carrying out a first round of tests on remote platforms and a second round of tests that is about to start. In cooperation with the Task Force on Distance Interpreting, we have produced guidelines and a checklist for interpreters to use and have a reference when it comes to technical requirements. But much is yet to be done. I think this is just a start, and we've been, in a way, lucky to have the acoustic shock emergency to make us aware of the importance of hearing for all of us. In fact, just on an anecdotal side, when I got my first job on site after February the 23rd, so before the lockdown, it felt amazingly good at being in the booth with a great sound quality, having only to focus on interpreting and without having to make any listening effort. It really made me aware of how much we interpreters have been suffering throughout these months, and how much we still have to struggle to make remote sound quality suitable for interpreting, and not only for passive listening. So in conclusion, I think there's a lack of evidence-based research in the fields related not only to remote interpreting, but to interpreters' health in general. We really need closer cooperation between AIIC, academia, and important stakeholders. There's a lot being said and written on health-related aspects on different channels, on the social media as well, but there's close to nothing with a scientifically solid background. So health, of course, is and should be our major concern, not only for us, but for our employers and recruiters as well. And we need to work on making interpreters themselves aware of the equipment they're using, their headphones, and the potential exposure risks that come with remote interpreting, but not only with, working as interpreters and being exposed to having to wear headphones and, the professional risk entailed by our work. So I'm sure that the Technical and Health Committee and AIIC at large can do a lot to give support and coordinate and promote this awareness, and try and have the medical and scientific community on board and make them aware of what our issues are.
Yeah, thank you very much, Gabriella. I think you mentioned very important things that definitely we can take away from today's discussion, and which should lead us to trying to find out how can we intensivate this kind of collaboration, and what can we do really in order to get the evidence-based data that you are missing there. You mentioned also a couple of documents or a couple of guidelines that were developed by AIIC TFDI in the first place. There was one question on the chat also asking where can people report incidents, and especially if freelancers have any possibility to report these kind of incidents in general. Is there something available in this regard also? Is there something included in the documents that were prepared by AIIC so far?
Well, as far as I know, there isn't, because there are actually no agencies, or at least I'm talking about Italy and the European countries that I know about. You don't know where to go and who to report your incident too. You may go to an emergency service and have it officially recognized, but then no insurance company will take that on board, or not even, social security for potential compensation of work-related injury, because it cannot be measured. So if we don't introduce, annual hearing testing, audiological testing, audiometry to be carried out on a regular basis, we can't possibly have in the injury recognized unless it's an officially, reported acoustic shock incident on a large, on a large scale. But for minor incidents, there's no way of reporting, and also the cumulative effect that can cause long-term disabling effects. There's no one that can really take that on board, and that's where we have to work, and the medical community has to be involved, and even work and safety agencies in different countries, they don't recognize hearing damage for interpreters as a professional injury. It's just call center operators, because there are quite a few studies that have been published about them. And when I got in touch with people in the Work and Safety Agency in Italy, they just told me they have nothing. There's no studies. Nobody knows anything about interpreters. So that's where we can do something. I mean, of course, research is extremely important and I fully support it. But in the meantime, we need to find ways to create awareness among, this decision makers and different stakeholders.
Yeah, so a lot of things that definitely we can take away as tasks and challenges for all of us, trying to really make progress on these different aspects. And thank you very much, Gabriella. I would like to come back also now to Christopher Stone and the sign language interpreting. I heard you mention before that there are a couple of research projects or activities that might be interesting in this context. Is there something that has already been done on the, let's say, sign language interpreting part, which could be interesting for the whole interpreting community? Could you share with us some projects, some initiatives that could be helpful in the light of the topics we've been discussing today, Chris?
Yeah, sure. In terms of general health, there's quite a nice study by Canadian colleagues, actually, Fisher and Woodcock, where they look at occupational stresses and strains of interpreters working. They did quite a comprehensive study of sign language interpreters. So there's some things in the report which are very specific about musculoskeletal injuries, which we see a higher incidence of in sign language interpreters than we do in the general population. But again, if we're thinking about that kind of thinking, if we know that if we were to take a general survey of the hearing health of interpreters, and the hearing health of interpreters is actually not as good as the general population, then again, that's an indicator, a very easy way of finding an indication of occupational health issues that need to be addressed. But yeah, it's a very comprehensive report. It was carried out across the whole of Canada and talks about a lot of things to do with health more generally. Many of us are now finding that we're home working. That has an ergonomic effect on your body. That's also something which then distracts from other cognitive activities. So sometimes if we think about interpreting holistically, then we need to think about it in the round. So yeah, I think that's quite an interesting study. I know that I think there's a study happening in America as well, looking at interpreters by Robin Dean, I think. It's a kind of emulating the cortisol study that we know of Barbara Mosa-Mercer. So looking at cortisol as a stress response in the body. And again, if we're thinking about holistic occupational health, if you're more stressed when you're working, what impact does that have cognitively on you? And longer term, if you have higher levels of stress, then what deleterious effects might that have on the longevity of your career? And so Robin Dean's looking at interpreters who work actually as video relay interpreters, so interpreting via video platforms. And the framework that she's using is actually about the decision latitudes that we have. So how much power do we have to make choices in those situations? So I suppose that's also one of the other things that we could probably we might want to think about in terms of remote interpreting. Is it that choices are being removed from us because we're now at a distance? And if so, is that one of the things which is causing us stress and eating away at some of our mental activity, and so creating a greater cognitive load for us? So those are, I mean, the Robin Dean study, I think, is still ongoing. So it'll be interesting to see when that's published. But yeah, the Fisher and Woodcock, there are a number of articles. I actually think her occupational report is available on her website. It's downloadable as a PDF, so that may be something of interest. But yeah, probably staying healthy is one of the things that many, but at least in the UK, apparently reported are finding it hard to do during these times.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that's really interesting for us to have a look into this kind of research that is either ongoing, as you say, or that has already been done. And I think we can take a lot of important information from there. Now we are almost coming already to the end. We still have a couple of minutes, and I would like to come back quickly to Dijana and Matthew. I felt like having heard, but maybe it was only my wishful thinking, that you talked about one of my favorite topics, definitely, which is ISO standards. Maybe ask you, do you consider those important, and what would it need to improve standardization in the field of interpreting? Maybe you could give us some information on the let's say the importance of this international approach in order to standardize interpreting, not only from the technical point of view, maybe, but also including other aspects.
I can start briefly, and I'll let Dijana comment. But you know, the analogy I would make is that today we're sort of in the Wild West with remote simultaneous interpreting. The standards, you know, I've just had a meeting, Dijana and I had a meeting with our client team the other day. Our clients don't know what to do, particularly the context for the Bureau, where the clients are actually the ones who are making decisions about the working environment for interpreters. So, you know, in the old days, a client didn't need to know much. They hired an AV company, or they had a staff AV, and everything was simple. You had one of any of, you know, 10 or 15 brands of simultaneous interpreter consoles, and technicians didn't have to be particularly gifted. They plugged everything in, and it worked. Nowadays, it's very different. We have, you know, multitude of different platforms that different clients are using. Some organizations are restricted in what they can use. Some have to use Teams or have to use Skype or Skype for Business. So the standards will be important because it really allows clients to and organizations to provide a safe and effective working environment without being necessarily experts. We take standards for granted in all areas of our lives, the building codes, cars, you know, in areas that affect broad you know, the entire population. Standards exist for a good reason, and we don't know, we take them entirely for granted, and their effect and their impact on our work. Because interpreting is such a niche, and because remote is such a relatively new concept, you know, standards are going to be more and more important so that people have easy and quick access to safe and quality working environments. So I can't speak more to the specifics of standards, but maybe Dijana can. But our organization, you know, has been a little bit late to the game in terms of contributing to standards, and we're trying to catch up really to many of the European organizations.
Well, I agree with you, Matthew, and to answer your question, Klaus, I think that the standards are written from a technical point of view, you know, for manufacturers, and that is all very good and really important to have, you know, good consoles and good booths, but there is a piece that's lacking, and that's on the everything we talked about today, the interpreter auditory health, the working conditions, the mental load, you know, and now with the profession changing through this pandemic, it's even more important to address these issues that are not so concrete as, you know, the frequency range and noise to signal ratio and all that. So I think there is definitely a space for improvement, or to add something to the standard where it would take into account all of these risks that we're dealing with today.
Yes, I couldn't agree more to what you say, which immediately brings us back to the fact that we lack let's say evidence-based data, which would be a very important ingredient, at least for the standards, because otherwise you will be formulating standards based on what? On individual perception, individual experience, but nothing really objective, and that is really one of the challenges we have in the whole sector, in the whole industry as such. Coming now already almost to the end, I would like to finalize this round with a question to Phillipe and Arnaud, basically to Phillipe, because I know that Phillipe has been in touch also with one university that did a very small scale study with their own students related to toxic sound, let's call it that way. And there are a lot of questions on toxic sound in the Q&A. Maybe Phillipe, you can give us a little insight into what they did there and what this could possibly lead to in the future. We were talking about this a couple of weeks ago also. Maybe you just can give us a perspective on what the research on toxic sound could look like.
You're talking about the research of Christophe and the results he sent us recently. Yes,
yep.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I thought. Yes, it's a project that Professor Christophe, I don't remember his family name, but
it's Dr. Christoph Stoll.
Who wanted to prevent the symptoms from appearing. So he was reporting that a lot of himself, actually, after doing interpretation, RSI interpretation, reported symptoms that he never experienced before. He was reporting ear fullness, headaches. He has to do walk after a session of interpretation, which he never had to do before because he never had those symptoms. So he reached out to me and Klaus about the issues and trying to find a way to prevent those issues from appearing. So is there a way potentially to test people? And after a discussion, after a brainstorming, we came out with the idea of testing the hearing threshold before and after an interpretation session. Using maybe an online test. The idea is not only to provide a measure, but also to provide some kind of incitative to be careful of the volume. So maybe reduce the volume if you're seeing a difference in threshold before and after. And we got a brief summary of tests that Christophe did with some of the students, but from the email, he was saying that a lot of people were reporting difference in their threshold and appearance of symptoms after using Zoom, WebEx, or different platform. It was not RSI; it was an online course. But he was saying that that this might be a way of testing sounds and testing symptoms before and after a session. So I think it wants to continue in this way. But yeah, I think that the idea of trying to prevent the symptoms is a good one as well, and trying to assess the symptom directly before and after a session is also another good way of studying the phenomenon and understanding better what is going on. I don't know if that's clear enough or if that answers your question, Klaus, but
yes, absolutely. I just wanted to let people know all that we are doing something on that also, and that there are already some at least some ideas for projects for the future. And I think this is exactly the kind of initiative we need on very different sides in order to make a progress on the whole topic. And one interesting result of that small scale study they did at the University of Heidelberg, and I found this really interesting, is that the students themselves, after a whole semester being exposed, let's say, to working online and to be trained online, they now refuse to work with a audio being transmitted via platforms like Zoom, for example, and they prefer to have a high quality recording instead. So this also shows us that it's something that really people are beginning to perceive, are beginning to understand. And I think this is also quite an interesting result of this initiative. Good. I think we got a lot of very interesting insights from very different points of view. Thank you very much to all the panelists for this very fruitful and interesting discussion. I would just like to remind all the people that made questions through the Q&A that, of course, as Linda said at the beginning, we are not able to answer all the questions today. We tried to pick out the ones that had the most votes on the one hand, but on the other hand also that fit best into the general scheme of today's event. There will definitely be more in the future, I hope. I think we all get out of this event today with a lot of motivation in order to keep on working on the different topics. And with this, I would like to hand over to Linda again for the final wrap up of today's event.
Thank you, Klaus, and thank you all. For me, this has been an extremely informative event and in some ways a historic event. And not only because of the large turnout. We were worried about the length of this event being too long, but personally, I feel like the time's just whizzed right by. It's truly been captivating. How did this AIIC event come about? In Canada, interpreters have been exposed to acoustic incidents and suffered acoustic shocks in particular for a long time, just like everywhere else. And like everywhere, interpreter health and safety has really not got the attention it deserves. And as we've learned today, the research on acoustic shocks is still at its very early stage. For too long, the problem of acoustic incidents and their debilitating effects for interpreters were simply not addressed. And no wonder evidence-based research is still at a very early stage. As Gabriella mentions, it's been a taboo topic for too long, swept under the rug. There's also been too much indifference on the part of all stakeholders, event organizers, event participants, SI equipment providers, employers, unions, technicians, audiologists, and even interpreters themselves. You saw in the study interpreters claiming they thought suffering shocks was just part of the job, a normal thing in the profession. And interpreters continue to ask themselves today, how do I report incidents anyway, and to whom? Worse, some say, and if I report an injury, what if I never get hired again? In Canada, thanks to many years of effort on the part of Translation Bureau staff interpreters especially, and this largely due to acoustic shocks occurring during telephone interpreting assignments, and also thanks to a number of AIIC Canada activists, 2019 was a turning point. AIIC Canada spearheaded a multi-pronged approach to draw attention to the problem of acoustic shock injuries with a view to vigorously raise awareness inside and outside the profession. Almost immediately, the Translation Bureau announced a big investment in research, in new technologies and new equipment. And thanks to a modest media campaign, I was contacted by this far-flung Canadian audiologist, an expert with a growing interest in acoustic shock, who said he was interested in collaborating with AIIC. You've met Phillipe today and Arnaud, and you've also learned about new projects involving Phillipe and Arnaud that are already underway. And very importantly, the leadership of our international association, AIIC, got on board, and the Acoustic Shocks Research Project got underway, which in turn helped further raise interpreters' awareness about the fundamental importance of evidence-based research for effecting positive change and advancing our profession. As Gabriella said earlier, there's still so much to be done, but here we are. We're over 800 of us from all walks of life. We've come together to learn more and to share knowledge. This is a huge accomplishment, and I'm feeling satisfied, and I think that this bodes well for the future, because together We are better. Thank you all, and I'd now like to just turn the floor back to Marc and Klaus to very briefly discuss next steps, and then we'll turn to Lara Duarte for closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Look, I'll try to be brief and try to to look ahead. I think what we've heard today clearly shows that the fears in the profession about the fact we may be replaced, by technologies and things, we hear that a lot, and there's a lot even in research of people looking at what has been labeled the dehumanization of our profession and of interpreters. I think what we've heard tonight and what we can see around in the research field today is that there's also a huge rehumanization of the profession and of interpreters in relation to their health, in relation to their well-being, in relation to their mental health. And I think it's extremely important, as I said before, to consider this as a great progress for us as a profession, but it can be done only through interdisciplinarity. And I really hope that the grant in particular, but also the connections that we have with various stakeholders around will be helpful to conduct, useful research in the future. Again, having research projects is one thing, but what you do with it is more important. We've said several times tonight that we lack evidence-based, data and everything. Yeah, we can have research projects, but what happens when we have them? I think what the Translation Bureau does is fantastic, and I really hope there are other institutions, and specifically the supranational institutions, who do the same. And I hope you are in touch with them, guys, to tell them what you're doing and to incite them to do the same. So yeah, looking ahead, the RC, and you've heard my colleagues tonight, will definitely do what they can to go in that direction. So yeah, I will hand over to Klaus about THE's view, and Lara will certainly tell us how AIIC sees how we can go further. But thank you very much for everyone's participation and your organization as well, Linda, of this event. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marc. Yes, on behalf of the Technical and Health Committee, I want to be very brief. I think we have heard a lot of very interesting details, both on studies that are already being carried out or that maybe will be carried out in the future. We've been talking about the necessity to have not only the interdisciplinary approach that Marc has stressed again, but we also heard about some very, let's say, some very practical things that will be done or that are already being done, but that we need to do much more in the future. And this is something that the Technical and Health Committee will definitely pick up. We do also or already have a couple of items on our activity list for the upcoming month and years. Of course, there are some limitations. I mean, all this is voluntary work, which needs to be done, which we all try to include in our daily life. But I think health and safety are such important topics that we should really make an effort all together in order to make progress on this. It has always been an important topic, I think. And as Linda just said before, we have been neglecting interpreter health and safety during a long time. And now with things like remote interpreting coming up much more, we suddenly realize that there is something else than just going sit into the booth and start interpreting and not care about the effects that this can have. Because definitely there have been some very serious incidents, not related to remote interpreting at all, but being reported from situations we are facing in our usual daily life. So definitely this needs to be addressed, and we should be very careful with ourselves and try to find solutions to that. One thing that I personally would like to have addressed much more in the future is how can we, based on this collaboration that I think we are all willing to undertake, how can we really set up activities, projects, get the necessary funding in order to make this happen, so that we can both have the evidence-based data, but as Marc says, we need to do something with it afterwards. And we should not also we shouldn't wait until we get this evidence-based data, but we should do the practical things that we can do. TFDI, AIIC TFDI has been doing a lot in the past month on this with the publication of several documents, and we definitely will keep on doing these kind of things. And you can expect from our side that we will definitely be there for the interpreter community, not only for AIIC members, but for the whole interpreter community with necessary information. And with that, I would like to hand over to Lara for the final wrap-up.
Well, good afternoon to you all. Well, AIIC certainly takes away a lot of food for thought from this webinar this afternoon. I think clearly one of the main takeaways is that this multi-stakeholder approach definitely works. I look at it as a convex, concave approach, so inward looking and outward looking. I also see it as an approach that requires us as AIIC, the International Association of Conference Interpreters, looking out for conference interpreters. That is our business, of course, and that means also looking out for their auditory health. Somebody mentioned, I think it was Christopher, the need for auditory health surveys, but that requires a baseline, hence the need for education of our interpreters, who sometimes can be extraordinarily passive when it comes to their own health, perhaps through the training when they're trainees, being told that you need to have a baseline, that you need regular testing of your hearing, because that is the only way we can then take the next step forward towards the occupational hazard recognition, etc. That means being proactive. But it also means that as an association that negotiates working conditions and international agreements, we need to work with others, and we need to think about another angle, which is what is in our client's ear. It's not just what the interpreter's ear is doing, it's what the client's ear is doing. We need arguments, and that means empirical evidence. We need to work on scientifically sound data that we can present when negotiating, when talking to people, when laying down and defining the working standards that so many people come to take for granted. I would also like to say that having analyzed the report and the recommendations of the project team very carefully, ExCo, the executive committee of AIIC, has now given the go-ahead for a working group to be set up on this and other connected topics, whose mandate will be to not only pursue further research, but investigate other related issues raised by the report, and hopefully also coordinate efforts undertaken by various stakeholders in the industry, and I would rope in the scientific community, of course. And so we come to the end of our seminar, and I would have to end with all the thank yous, so please bear with me just for another minute or so. On behalf of the president of AIIC and the executive committee of the association, I would like to begin by recognizing the Translation Bureau of Canada's collaborative approach to research, because that's really where this particular chapter of research began, with the work done on portable protective devices. Thank you to Matthew Ball and to Dijana Lazar, and through you too, your colleagues, and also in particular the senior management of the Translation Bureau for supporting evidence-based research. It would also be remiss of me not to thank Linda Ballantyne and AIIC Canada for their work alongside the Translation Bureau, a productive partnership which has already produced immediate and lasting effects for the interpreting community. So thank you. Our heartfelt thanks also to Arnaud Noreña and to Phillipe Fournier from the Laboratoire de Neurosciences Sensorielles et Cognitives at the Université d'Aix-Marseille, whose immense knowledge and interest in acoustic shocks in other occupations has now, of course, been extended to the world of conference interpretation and to the issues faced by all of us as interpreters. AIIC is extremely grateful for the collaboration and looks forward to further iterations. Thank you also to all of the AIIC panelists, to Marc Orlando and the research committee, to Klaus Ziegler and the technical and health committee for all their hard work and for their dedication. We're all volunteers and juggling so many different hats. Thank you for helping to further our knowledge of what we do daily and how it affects us. Many of you are also members of the project team responsible for the Acoustic Shocks Research Project led by Marc, and we hope that this is just the beginning of much more empirical research. To Richard Lever, of course, the technical maestro behind the scenes. You haven't seen him, but he helped us conduct this webinar. And to Raquel Scheitzer, who worked very hard alongside him and Linda. And finally, to all the participants from all around the world, interpreters, non-interpreters, members of AIIC, non-members of AIIC, we hope you found the seminar informative. If you're a member of the Interpreting Studies community, we invite you to take a closer look at the AIIC Research Grant and to disseminate it to those who might be interested in the type of research you heard about here today. And we look forward to seeing you on the next leg of our journey. Watch this space. Until then, stay safe and healthy. And as a doctor friend said to me the other day, stay sane and let the weekend begin. Enjoy your weekend.